on the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell and I'm in the commentary box at Edgbaston Cricket Ground in Birmingham, where the second men's test between England and New Zealand is taking place in front of the biggest crowd of spectators we've had here in England for some 2 years because of COVID. 17,000 per day are allowed in. It's part of a government pilot scheme around crowds and COVID, so fingers crossed it all goes off without a hitch. The first test match ended in a bit of a disappointing fashion on that final day. There was a tantalising declaration set up, but New Zealand bowled too well. England couldn't make a chase of it, but equally New Zealand couldn't take wickets, so we ended up with a stalemate. However, that does mean that the series is up for grabs here in Birmingham.
Sounds brilliant, Ali. This is Alister Nicholson for the ABC in Melbourne, filling in for Jim Maxwell this week. We're about to come out of our fourth, I think it is, lockdown. I'm losing count. So in a matter of hours, as I speak to you, we'll be coming out of lockdown. Homeschooling is over. Golf courses are reopening. If you hear the sound of a cork popping off a champagne bottle during Stumped in this episode, you know exactly why, because people in Melbourne are pretty happy to get some of their freedoms back.
Unfortunately, we're still locked down here, or locked up, or whatever it is in Bangalore. Hello, I'm Charu Sharma for All India Radio. There could be some relaxation from next week, but we'll see. So it's been very long and very frustrating, but so be it. However, of course, there is cricket going on internationally, and something tells me that I should be somewhat grateful to not be into social media.
Yes, Charu, that's a very good point. I mean, it's been such a strange time between test matches because I wouldn't say it's been a happy time at all. I think anyone in cricket who cares about cricket has just been left feeling very deflated around events that started during that first test and tweets by Ollie Robinson and then have continued with further tweets coming to light, which the public have highlighted. And that's where we're going to start the programme this week, because it has dominated the news agenda, the question of inclusion in cricket. We had the England men's cricketers, if you remember, taking a stance against discrimination at the start of that first test match at Lord's, and indeed at Edgbaston as well. They'll be wearing T-shirts, wearing anti-discrimination messages at the start of play on day one. But that was only for historical tweets to then emerge, contrary to that very message, first from fast bowler Ollie Robinson. And then since then, after that first test at Lord's, historical tweets from other England players have been publicly questioned as well. The ECB has already suspended Robinson from international cricket while they investigate historical racist and sexist tweets he posted in 2012 and 2013. He was 18 and 19 years of age at the time. They've also said they'll take, quotes, relevant and appropriate action after offensive posts from several other England players came to light. Now, tweets from Owen Morgan, James Anderson and Joss Butler have been highlighted online on social media. The ECB are also specifically looking into a report of an offensive tweet posted by a player when he was under 16, so that player hasn't been identified. That is a situation then. Important to note that Ollie Robinson's suspension is not punishment. That's part of the ECB's process to determine what next. He's been suspended while they do their investigation. Alan, Charu, I'll just start with that first of all. The right course of action by the ECB, Al, to suspend Ollie Robinson while all this goes on?
I think they need time to get to the bottom of it, Ali, as much as it's disappointing for Ollie Robinson that he can't play in this test match after doing so well in the first test match. I think that the ECB needs time to look at what was going through his mind at the time, understand the circumstances around why he put out those horrendous tweets and gauge whether he has moved on from where he was at that time. I don't profess to know much about Ollie Robinson's background or his education. Clearly, he hasn't thought out what he's written, and there's an understanding these days, I think, that people have that once something's in writing, it's there forever. And clearly Ollie Robinson's been caught out in that regard. So I think the ECB can't be seen to be making knee-jerk reactions here. But also I understand the difficulty for the ECB because it's been criticised previously for not doing enough in this space, for not making the game a game for everyone enough, not making it safe and not having a diverse representation even within its management setup. So for that to come, and the day, as you say, that they wear the T-shirts on the ground and then those tweets to emerge was very unfortunate. the ECB is in a difficult position because it's either going to take next to no action and say that it happened in the past and then be accused of being soft on discrimination. Then if Ollie Robinson's punished heavily for his actions, the ECB is equally going to be accused, and already has been, including by the Prime Minister of England, of being too harsh. So it's a very difficult and delicate situation that's unfolding at the moment. But I would say overall, the decision to stand him down while the investigation takes place, given the amount of focus that would be on him in this test match, I think that's the appropriate course of action.
Well, I don't want to be accused of making too generous a stand here, because in a sense, if it does affect somebody more deeply, it's us South Asians who have been specifically mentioned. But, there's a macro and there's a micro here, Alister, because in a macro sense, of course, it's all pervading around the world. There's lots of racism, or reverse racism, if you like, in many places. So that's a much bigger problem. But in a micro sense, one cricketer has been found out to have done something when he was obviously at a relatively immature age. And regardless of how well he did in that first test match, I think his apology was very important. I think it was very well worded as well and seemed as genuine as possible. So what is there now to investigate? I mean, the tweets are there, the man is there, he's apologized, you've got to kind of get on with it. The lessons that, and I mentioned this last week as well, that need to be taken from this episode is that counseling and education needs to start a lot earlier, particularly in the world of sport, where if sportspersons go on to become international celebrities, everything may get dug up. So it's a warning sign for the authorities that look after junior teams to perhaps do a lot of work there rather than wait till somebody gets to a position where, he steps up because of something he did 10, 15, maybe sometimes 20 years ago. So people in our part of the world can take umbrage, yes, but he has apologized. And what more can he do at this point of time?
Yeah, I think the time frame's relevant too, Ali. I think the time frame is certainly relevant when you're talking about someone who is 18, 19 years of age, is now 27, and this stuff is getting picked out. People are forensically going through Twitter pages to see what they can find. Is this, and this is what I think the investigation will find, Charu, is this the Ollie Robinson of then, and a very different Ollie Robinson exists now? What are his views now? As you say, I think that the apology was brilliantly worded. They do need to be seen to be thoroughly looking into this and making sure it doesn't happen again, and also making part of the solution, I think, Ali and Charu here. He potentially can be seen as someone who misunderstood this area previously and has now reached a point where he understands it very clearly. So here's the example of how you can change. I think Nasser Hussain summed it up perfectly when he talked about the acceptance that society can change and needs to change. Well, if we accept that, then we also have to accept that people can change. And in the case of Ollie Robinson, I think that's what the ECB needs to determine.
And you mentioned, Charu, about, social media. And I think we touched last week, didn't we, about this sense of social media being vetted. And I have heard some commentators or pundits during the week say, well, Ollie Robinson, should be taken around the game to educate cricketers on the perils of social media. But that misses the point, doesn't it? Because it's not about the perils of social media. It's about the perils of, you're pointing to your head, Charu, I can see it. It's about not having those thought processes in the first place. True. Although I was thinking about this, and social media can actually be a form of self-education. If you always take a moment to think before you put something out on social media, would I say that in an interview? Would I say that publicly? Would I say that to somebody's face? And if that stops yourself and you think, well, no, I wouldn't, well, that can be a form of self-education to make you pause and think, well, why am I thinking that in the first place?
Well, there's one more angle to social media very quickly. The fact that sometimes people may not realize it is going around the world. And at times people tend to treat it as a conversation between two people, which it's not. It goes around the world. Everyone has access to whatever you said and therefore whatever you think. So you are right, Alison. I think there has to be that thought, that break, that check saying, well, hang on, let me read what I've written again, because do I have global sensibilities in mind when I say this, rather than just a personal joke?
Yeah, it's very different, isn't it? And to understand how what you say may be perceived by others, but that takes a certain level of empathy. And I guess that's where we come to that point of education. What do we mean when we talk about educating players on this? And I guess, we're talking on a cricketing sense, but it's society as a whole. And you could say, well, what actually level to start with? To what degree should all that education rest on cricket's shoulders? Because surely a lot of that is schools, it's home, it goes beyond the game. Cricket's taking an awful lot on because it has that level of, I guess, social responsibility that it sees, and the players, the England players, want to take that on. They know they are role models, but it can't be all cricket's responsibility either.
Well, I'd just like to add a couple of things here, Alison. One, of course, you mentioned education, and yes, that's the key for sure. It's a great word to use, but it's rather basic at several levels. And the word I'd like to use, which is not easy to get at all, is exposure, because that then truly teaches you how the rest of the world functions, different cultures, different people. And in that sense, I would like to quickly mention the IPL, because that, to my mind, has opened various windows in the minds of global cricketers when they come here and kind of meet a vast variety of different people who are on the same team, not just the same homogenous mix, but very, very different people. I think that has, in many ways, just gotten cricketers closer together, at least the cricketing community, into understanding different cultures and different people. How can you gather exposure? It's not easy. You can't pluck it from a tree. It just takes time. So a lot of these junior tours, A tours, I think they're also helping a great deal in the cricketing fraternity, at least, to understand better different cultures and the mores around the world.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Now, after almost a year of being interim boss, Nick Hockley has been named the new permanent chief executive of Cricket Australia. The Englishman stepped into the job last June after the resignation of Kevin Roberts and following concerns about Cricket Australia's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Previously, Hockley had been in charge of the local organising committee for the 2020 World Cup, successfully delivering that record crowd for the women's final at the MCG just before the pandemic hit Australia. And before that, he worked on the 50-over World Cup 2015 as well. Alister, you've been speaking to him. Just how big a challenge did Hockley first have when he took on that role in the interim capacity, and then now?
Yeah, he inherited some serious problems. 20 months into the job, Kevin Roberts was essentially shown the door as the CEO of Cricket Australia, and this was as a result of his handling of the COVID-19 situation and cricket, his forecasts around the financial hit that Cricket Australia would take as a result of the pandemic. Many thought were far and beyond what was realistic and an overreaction. There was the standing down of 80% of the workforce. There were cuts to payments. State associations made cuts as well, and there was a period of falling out with those state associations as well. So the pressure built, so Nick Hockley had to come in. In the background, there was a TV rights battle going on with one of the TV networks, the free-to-air telecaster Channel 7, looking for a discount because the cricket they were promised couldn't be delivered in the way that they had expected. So there were fires to fight on all fronts. I did have a chat with him, Ali, as you mentioned, and started by asking him about what his key priorities were now that he'd taken on the role on a full-time basis.
So it's been quite a year navigating the sport through COVID. I think what it's given is it just a huge amount of really a kind of a head start in terms of relationships, getting to know everybody, understanding the issues. So I think a huge amount of great work has been done. The vision for Australian cricket is to be a sport for all. So I think now it's making sure that we continue to do everything we can to get cricket back on safely, and that we don't lose momentum from the amazing work that was being done before we were plunged into COVID. I think, we were very privileged or very fortunate here in Australia to host the last event before COVID hit, the Women's T20 World Cup on March 8th. And I think that was really indicative of everything we're trying to achieve, taking a real leadership position, driving to be a sport for all. So I think, now that we've come through, it's about making sure that we maintain that momentum and building on those strong foundations.
What's your perspective on whether Australian players should return to play in the tournament, now move to the UAE for September? There's obviously the West Indies tour coming up and a lot of cricket on the horizon for Australian players. Pat Cummins has said, for example, that he's not keen to return and finish the IPL. Do you have an objection to other players playing in the competition again?
I think the first thing that I'd say is that our hearts go out to all our friends in India for the current situation and the fact that the tournament had to be suspended due to the current health situation. We've obviously got lots of partners. We speak to our friends at the BCCI, and we're very grateful for the fact that they were able to repatriate our players so quickly. In terms of the postponement and the reschedule, we've obviously got a really full program into the summer. So I think it's hard to say on a blanket basis who could be available and who won't. But the work that we're doing now that everyone's back home, they're having a short rest now before we regroup ahead of our tour to the West Indies. And then we'll be looking at it on a case-by-case basis to see who might be available to complete the remainder of the IPL and for whom it might be, it just doesn't fit in with the broader international commitments.
Charu, Nick said there that they'll look at the Australian players going to the IPL on a case-by-case basis. If there are fewer overseas players potentially going to the IPL, how is that going to potentially dilute the competition?
Massively. I mean, the IPL is not the world's biggest cricket tournament just because there are lots of followers in our part of the world or there's a lot of commercial support. It is what it is because the best players from around the world are a part of it. And if some of the best players who do belong to Australia are not allowed in, it's going to take a major sheen off the remaining part of the IPL. However, I'll just take a moment to talk about something which is a wider situation here, which is the concept of professionalism. I don't think cricket at this point of time completely understands the concept of being a professional. Because if you take other sports, for instance, let's take tennis or football, can you imagine Argentina saying, Messi, I don't know, you want to play for Barcelona? Well, maybe not this year. People will play where they want to play and do the best they can in the short time span they have to be the professional they can be. So for cricket boards still to be saying, well, we'll see who we allow to go or not, is I think a little short-sighted in the wider professional sense of sport. Change will happen, I'm sure, where the players will say, okay, enough, I go where I want to. And if you want to pick me for the country, great, because I'm good enough.
I think the issue, Charu, is that then they tend to pick and choose a little bit, don't they, when it comes to whether they play in the
life,
IPL
Alister.
I know, but it doesn't resonate well with the fans, and the fans are number one in my view, and certainly in Australia, there's a frustration if someone decides to take the enormous sums of money on offer and go and play in the IPL, but then isn't able to make themselves available for an international tour, for example.
Well, that's all we've got time for on this week's Stumped here on All India Radio. You can keep in touch with us on Twitter throughout the week. We're at BBCWS Sports. Make sure you use the hashtag BBC Stumped. My thanks to Charu, Sharma and Alister Nicholson, and of course to all of you for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.